You are 12, and you have turned the same iron spit since before dawn. 6 fires burn in a row in front of you, each one tall enough for a grown man to stand up inside, and they never go out. You are the lowest rank in the household of Henry VIII, and this is the story of how you climb to the very highest. Closer and closer to the king, to his silver, to his ear, to the room where he sleeps. Here is what nobody tells you about that climb. Every rung you rise takes you nearer the one thing in England more dangerous than this fire. Him. The swan browning on your spit is going to a table you will never be allowed to enter, to feed a man whose face you are forbidden to look upon. And somewhere above you tonight, past every door you cannot open, one man holds the only key to the king's bedchamber. He walks in without knocking. He is the most trusted man in the kingdom, and his name is Norris. In a few years, his head will come off on Tower Hill, and the velvet chair he guards will be handed to the next man, still warm. That is where this climb ends. Every step up is a step toward it. Level 1, the fire. You are a turnbroach, a spit boy, one of 6 who keep the meat turning at Hampton Court. Around you, the kitchens are their own country. 55 rooms, 200 people, 600 meals sent up twice a day, more than 1 million logs burned to ash every year. It is the loudest, hottest, most alive place you have ever stood in. And here's the part no one tells you about suffering. You belong to it. The men beside you share their bread. When your arms give out, someone takes the handle from you without a word. At night you sleep on the warm stone by the embers. And for a boy who arrived here with nothing, warmth every single night is not a small thing. It is very close to happiness. But look at your hands. The fire has cooked the hair off your forearms and left the skin shining and tight. You crouch so near the flame for so many hours that your eyes water without stopping now. And you have learned to turn the swan by the sound of the fat spitting rather than by looking, because looking hurts. Until a few years ago, boys like you worked this fire naked, or near enough. The king himself had to give the order that his scullions stop going about, in his own words, naked or in garments of such vileness, and hand you a clothing allowance. That is your rank. You are the boy the king had to be told to clothe. And here is the strange arithmetic of the fire. You will turn tons of meat this year, swan and venison, 8,000 sheep across the whole court, oxen by the 100, and you will taste almost none of it. You cook for a mouth you will never see. To ever taste what you cook, you understand. You would have to climb toward that mouth. So you begin to climb. Level 2. The hall. They move you out of the smoke and into the great hall, in livery now. The Tudor rose, stitched on your chest, carrying dishes to the long tables where the household eats in strict order of rank. You are seen, for the first time in your life. You stand upright. You are paid. After the fire, you feel let out of a furnace and into a church. Then one evening, an older servant explains the thing that will sit underneath everything from now on. Before the king eats, someone tastes his food, not for flavor, for poison. The guards at the door, the yeomen of the guard, 600 of them the year the king paraded his court to France. Big men chosen from just below the gentry. They guard the entrances and taste the king's dishes before he lifts a fork. You had thought the taster held a position of honor, and he does. It is also this. If the food is poisoned, the taster dies, and the king does not. That is what the taster is for. His mouth stands between the poison and the king. You notice, that night, that the closer a man stands to the king, the more of the king's death he has quietly agreed to absorb. How far that arithmetic goes, you have not yet seen. You only know that the men who taste nothing, who stand at the inner doors and never carry a plate, are the ones who rise. At the very top of that logic, they say, is one man who has never handed a plate to taste and never turned away from any door. The knight called Norris, who keeps the king's own key. You are years from ever seeing his face, so you learn the faces you can. You make yourself useful. You climb. Level 3. The door. Now you carry messages instead of meat. You are a groom of the outer chambers, and you pass through doors the guardsmen only stand beside. You see the court up close, who is rising and who is quietly finished, whose marriage is being arranged, and whose is being undone. Knowledge is the new warmth. It is worth more than the fire ever was. But you learn the cost of the door in your second week. You repeat something small, nothing really. Who spoke to whom in a corridor, and a man 3 ranks above you takes you aside. Kindly, he tells you the last groom who talked is no longer at court, and no one says where he went. So you stop talking. You become good at carrying a face that shows nothing. You learn that at this level, the things you know are not power. They are weight. You can be killed for the wrong sentence, and you have started to collect sentences the way you once collected burns. And now you see Norris often. He is the man at the top of the stairs you are climbing, the groom of the Stool, the king's closest servant, richer than most of the lords who bow to him. 1,300 pounds a year flows to a man whose title, said plainly, means he attends the king on the toilet. You would laugh, except that every man in this court would trade his own name to be him. He holds the key. He decides who the king sees. When you want something, you learn quickly. You do not ask the king. You ask Norris. He nods at you once in a corridor, and you feel it for a week. Level 4. The Privy Chamber. And then, impossibly, they let you in. You are a gentleman of the Privy Chamber now, inside the private rooms, close enough to hand the king his shirt, to hear him laugh at his own jokes. Close enough to hold the strings of the privy purse that spends thousands in a single year on his jewels, his gambling, his coats. This is everything the boy at the fire wanted. You are warm. You are trusted. You are inside. Norris moves through these same rooms beside you now, close enough to touch, the king's key hanging at his belt. And here is the reward the fire promised you all those years ago. You finally eat the king's own dishes, sent back warm from his table. You lift the food you once only turned on a spit, and you notice you can barely taste it. The fire took that from you years ago, and no one ever gives it back. And standing there, holding the king's own coat over your arm, you finally understand the thing the food taster taught you, all the way to the bottom. The court is not a ladder that lifts men up and away from danger. It is a machine built around one single body, the king's. And its only real purpose is to make certain that when death comes for that body, it lands on someone else first. The poison lands on the taster. The plague lands on the servant sent into the sick town. The blame lands on whoever is standing nearest when the king's mood turns black. Every rung you climbed, you were not climbing towards safety. You were volunteering to stand nearer the front of that line. You think of the fire now, and the boy you were, and you understand that he was the safest you will ever be. No one bothers to kill the boy who turns the spit. They only kill the men the king loves. Level 5. The Stool. You are in the room the spring it happens. 1536. Norris falls from higher than you have ever stood, and you watch every foot of the drop. You hear how it begins, because in these rooms, you hear everything. The Queen, Anne Boleyn, teases Norris one April day about why he is so slow to marry her cousin. It is nothing. Courtiers talk. The kind of thing you have heard 100 times standing right here. Norris gives some light answer, and the Queen says, half in jest, that he must be waiting for dead men's shoes. That if any harm ever came to the king, Norris would look to have her himself. She says it. He only stands there and lets the words hang in the air. And you, who have trained yourself to show nothing, feel the cold drop through you, because you already know the rule. Near this king, in these rooms, to let a sentence about his death go unanswered is treated as though you spoke it yourself. Within weeks, Norris is in the tower, and you are still standing in the Privy Chamber holding the king's coat. You have dressed this king by now, so you know exactly what Norris was standing next to. In his later years, the king is vast, near 28 stone, his legs ulcerated and weeping, his temper going black with the pain. And the man standing nearest that temper is the man who catches the worst of it. They tell you afterward that the king rode beside Norris on the road back from the May Day jousts at Greenwich and promised him his life. A full pardon if he would only confess. Norris said no. He would not buy back his life with a lie about the Queen. On the 17th of May, 1536, on Tower Hill, in front of a crowd, his own servant recorded that Sir Henry Norris said almost nothing at all, and then the axe came down. The most trusted man in England, the man with the only key, the man whose place you are now close enough to take. And you already know what becomes of the velvet chair he kept, because you are the one who picks it up. Finale, the machine continues. The close stool does not stop being used the day Norris dies. It is a padded box covered in crimson velvet and studded with gold, a pewter pot beneath the seat, and it travels everywhere the king goes, to banquets, to hunts, even to war. Within weeks, the king simply needs a new groom of the stool, and the velvet chair comes to you, along with the little chart where the groom records the state of the king's health, still warm from a dead man's hands. In the record that survives, the man who actually took Norris's place was called Sir Thomas Heneage. Whatever his name, he is you now. The next one up the stairs, close enough to the king to be trusted, and close enough to be killed. Norris was guilty of nothing but standing too close to a marriage the king had already decided to end. He did not die for what he did. He died for where he stood. That is what the whole climb was. Not a rise towards safety, but a slow walk to the front of a line, dressed in better and better clothes with every step. If that cost stayed with you, if you want to see how the other men in these rooms rose and fell, then subscribe, because there are more of these coming. You know this feeling, even now, even in a life with no kings in it. The nearer you get to the thing everyone wants, the money, the corner room, the ear of the powerful person, the more you have to lose. And the fewer people are left above you to catch the blame when something goes wrong. Proximity to power has always been the most expensive thing a person can buy. Somewhere down in the kitchens tonight, a boy of 12 is turning the same iron spit, roasting a swan for a table he will never be allowed to enter, watching his own arms shine in the firelight. He thinks the fire is the worst it will ever be for him. He will spend the rest of his life climbing away from it, toward the velvet chair, and the only key, and the front of the line,